Welcome to Trading Capital's exclusive analysis. Today is June 9th, discussing natural gas daily chart here. Very interesting price action is currently unfolding in the nat gas space. And before the bulls get too excited, let's just try to dissect what is going on here. And why should the bulls be getting excited here in the near term? Well, clearly you can see pivot, pivot, pivot. This is an inverse head and shoulders, a very large one on the daily chart. And you can see that the inverse head and shoulders range is roughly about a 94% from your low to your high, or in dollar moves, it's about $1.51 potential upside move. Now, I say potential because it has not officially broken out above this neckline. So this 311 and change neckline, it's a flat horizontal sloping neckline. So basically we need to be watching to see if price action can get above there. If price action can get above there, take a look what that typically means. It means that we could actually see a potential rally all the way to about 463 over the coming months. And that would be a pretty astonishing move in nat gas, especially when you factor in we have the likes of oil, which is the double levered ETF to trade. And then you can even go a little bit more aggressive and short KOLD, which is a triple. Again, nothing's financial advice, but certainly when we look at the inverse picture of nat gas, okay, which is your KOLD ETF. Take a look at this neckline. You get a bearish formation on KOLD, which triggers this head and shoulders on the daily. You're taking a pretty precipitous fall to the downside. So there's a lot of potential opportunities in the near term shaping up in nat gas. Now the question is, which way is it going to break? Bullish, bearish? Well, let's go back to the actual underlying ETF and see the technical level. So we all know there's a potential for a bullish pattern to trigger here. Even if you look at the intraday price action, so really the 4-hour chart or the hourly chart, and I'm actually just going to discuss this. Obviously, nat gas on Friday had a really bullish close back above prior day high at 290. So that's a very strong technical support now that we have to trade against. But when you look at a pattern analysis, nat gas actually triggered a beautiful inverse head and shoulders on the 4-hour chart, and it observed through this left shoulder, this high pivot head, and then this right shoulder. Your neckline is drawn from this pivot high, or your left shoulder, through your high pivot on your right shoulder. And look at this beautiful back test on the 4-hour chart. Dip below, recapture, retest, breakout. So this short-term intraday pattern should yield some continued upside. If we look at where the upside is potentially being, take a look at that. That takes us just slightly above that 311 pivot zone up here. So if we get a completed move off of this 4-hour inverse head and shoulders, that is going to yield to a potential on watch breakout of that daily chart pattern. Again, the 4-hour pattern is a very micro one that has triggered, which should yield a move above 311. And then the long-term pattern, the daily or the weekly chart, is showing some potential signs of also wanting to have a continuation move higher. Now, a couple important things. If we erase all of the bullish patterns, we obviously have to keep a lens on the market and what is transpiring here. And there's a few things across the board that we have to notice. If you look at what happened to commodities on Friday, commodities got absolutely demolished. Huge gap down on the DBC. You look at the likes of gold, silver, uranium, oil took a little bit of a hit. And when money flow is starting to come out of commodities again, potentially, you just want to be cautious with nat gas because it's still a commodity that can see pretty dramatic moves to the downside if the whole global commodity market is moving in tandem. Now, there is a resistance level that I'm watching very closely. Again, it's from this pivot high through these previous little high pivots, and you can see it's a channel of resistance that we're going to be watching. So it's through this pivot high, this pivot low, your breakdown zone, which sent you free falling. It connects through this pivot high, and then obviously the most recent pivot high that we made. So clearly we're inside a level of resistance where you saw a sharp reversal. So we have to be paying close attention to that area right now. The nice important factor, I want to throw on the weekly 50 moving average. Take a look at this. So this is the daily chart. I'm going to flip to the weekly chart here, just in the near term. The weekly chart is quite fascinating on nat gas price action. Why do I say that? Well, When we look at this weekly 50 moving average in purple, it's currently sitting at 254. And what's really, really fascinating about that is here in this consolidation phase, this previous 2023 breakout which failed, notice how we had that impulse green candle above the 50. You got 2 weeks of sell side pressure, 1, 2, retested the 50-week moving average. Look what's happening here. Impulse green candle breakout, 2 weeks of now selling, back testing the 50-day. What comes next? Well, if we're going according to this cycle, you had 1 week of rally with another secondary attempt at a rally which got rejected. But you did manage to have a second weekly high close. So if price action is shaping up to be of similar nature, we should look for another second weekly high close and potentially another little pierce of this 311 area. And then that becomes the question, do we follow the same thing where you have a failed breakdown and you start selling off? Or is this a scenario where we actually get a third weekly higher close above the 50 weekly moving average? So I think that if we start to break the pattern structure that happened here where you only got 2 weekly closes above the 50 MA, if we start to get 1, 2, and 3, it might suggest that this inverse head and shoulders has some potential legs and signs of very, very high probabilistic nature of playing out. So I'm watching it very, very closely. There's some other channels that I'm watching on nat gas as well. If I actually just remove this, there's an interesting channel that I'm watching. If you do your parallel channel tool and you draw it from these highs here down to these lows, extend it back, you can see you've connected pivot high to pivot high, pivot low, a little bit of a failure at breaking out, rejected, a retest of that same resistance zone, rejected. Now, if we start to hold above this high pivot weekly reversal, I do think that we can start to mean revert back into the channel, and then that would give us our bullish upside range. Obviously the next resistance would be this high channel resistance trend line. So I'm watching that gas very closely because it is shaping up for potentially a very, very big move. Now, if the bulls get rejected here, watch out below because nat gas can see some precipitous price action to the downside. Looking at the equity space, AR still holding up okay. Potentially some minor signs of maybe a little bit of a daily chart bear flag. So watching that closely. We look at EQT. EQT is another one, which honestly holding up okay at the moment, and it still has that longer term weekly bullish pattern that is still developing, and you're trading right at that neckline. We look at LNG. That one's obviously still trying to firm up here and catch a little bit of a potential breakout in the near term, but it hasn't really been able to do so yet. Still just maintaining its upsloping trend line for the time being. We look at CPK. CPK is another one that's had this huge breakout out of its huge 126 consolidation range. Nice few weekly closes above, back testing your previous high pivot support zone. This one has triggered a bit of an inverse head and shoulders. Depending on how you want to draw it, you can see there's a little left shoulder here, nice steep head, very large right shoulder, and this upside measure move should take you to about 122.44. So again, I'm watching for signs in the actual equity space. Look for nat gas stocks to try to give us some insights. It's the same way when you look at gold and silver trades. You often want to look at the miners. When miners start to lead, that often makes more of a bullish case for the underlying commodities in the mining space. So nat gas is very similar. If you start to see more of the speculative equities like AR, EQT, LNG starting to move, that could be telling us that, you know what, maybe the commodity is going to break out here and continue its bullish ascent. So a lot of different things could be unfolding here in the near term. If you found this video useful and helpful, please give it a like down below, and we'll see you on the charts